name is Chris, and this happened last fall. My friends and I wanted to take one last camping trip before the weather turned cold. We chose Black Hollow Forest, a remote area known for its towering trees and quiet trails. The ranger at the entrance gave us a strange look as we signed in. "Be careful out there," he said. "Stick to the trails and don't stay past dark." We laughed it off. After all, we were experienced campers. But looking back, I realized he was trying to warn us. We set up camp near a clearing, surrounded by dense trees. That night, as we sat around the fire, the woods were eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, just the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. Around midnight, we heard it, footsteps crunching in the underbrush. "Probably just an animal," my friend Jason said, shining his flashlight into the trees. But the sound wasn't random. It was deliberate, slow, and getting closer. The next morning, we found strange marks carved into the trees around our campsite. They looked like eyes, dozens of them, staring down at us. "Who would do this?" my friend Sarah asked, her voice shaky. "Probably some kids messing around," I said, trying to reassure her. But as we hiked deeper into the forest, the feeling of being watched grew strong. That evening, Jason wandered off to collect firewood and didn't come back. We searched for hours, calling his name, but there was no trace of him. When we returned to the campsite, his flashlight was lying on the ground, still on, but Jason was nowhere to be found. The carved eyes on the trees seemed different now, as if they were watching us more intently. That night we heard whispers in the woods, faint, indistinct voices that seemed to come from every direction. At first, we thought it was Jason, but the voices didn't sound right. They repeated our names over and over, but with a strange, mocking tone. "Who's out there?" Sarah shouted into the darkness, but the only response was laughter, low and guttural, like it was coming from something inhuman. The next morning, we decided to pack up and leave, but the trail we had come in on was gone. The trees had shifted, their trunks forming a barrier that blocked our way out. "It's like the forest doesn't want us to leave," Sarah whispered. As we tried to find another path, we noticed something horrifying. The carved eyes were now on every tree, following us as we moved, the shadow figures. That night, as we huddled around the fire, we saw them, figures standing just beyond the light of the flames. They were tall and thin, their bodies blending into the trees, but their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. One of them stepped closer, its movements jerky and unnatural, and whispered in a voice that sounded like Jason's. "Why are you running? The forest's curse." We realized too late that the forest wasn't just watching us. It was alive, and it was playing with us. The carved eyes weren't random. They marked its prey. As we tried to escape, the forest closed in, the trees forming an endless maze. The whispers grew louder, and the figures stalked us relentlessly, their glowing eyes the only light in the darkness. The final night, by the fourth night, it was just Sarah and me. The firewood was gone, and the cold crept in as the whispers surrounded us. Sarah collapsed, crying, as one of the figures stepped into the clearing. It reached out a long, twisted hand and touched her forehead. Her eyes went blank, and she stood up, walking into the forest without looking back. I tried to stop her, but the shadows pulled her away. The escape. I don't know how I made it out. One moment I was running, the forest closing in around me, and the next, I stumbled onto the ranger station at the edge of the woods. The ranger looked at me with pity as I begged for help. "Black Hollow doesn't let everyone go," he said quietly. "You're lucky. Don't come back." I still dream about the forest, the carved eyes, the whispers, the shadow figures. Sometimes, when I'm walking alone, I feel like I'm being watched, and I hear faint laughter in the wind. Los Angeles, 2:47 a.m. The subway station was almost empty, except for a few night shift workers waiting for the last train. Michael Carter, a freelance journalist, was heading home after an exhausting night of work. As he checked the schedule board, a strange announcement echoed through the station. "Final train approaching. This service has no scheduled stops." Michael frowned. That didn't make sense. But before he could question it, the train pulled in, doors sliding open. Inside, the compartment was nearly empty, except for one lone passenger, a woman in a red dress, sitting near the back. She wasn't moving, and she wasn't breathing. Michael hesitated but stepped inside. The doors hissed shut behind him. He moved down the aisle, gripping the cold metal pole. The woman in the red dress sat perfectly still, her face hidden under her long hair. Michael cleared his throat. "Hey, do you know where this train is headed?" She didn't answer. Then the lights flickered, and in that brief moment, he saw her face. Bloodied, torn, eyes hollowed out, and she was grinning. Michael stumbled back, heart hammering. The train was moving too fast now, the tunnels outside a blur of darkness. He grabbed his phone. No signal. Then he noticed something chilling. The station names flashing on the screen didn't exist. Passing Hollow Creek. Next stop nowhere. Final stop the other side. A cold realization settled in. This wasn't a normal train, and he wasn't supposed to be on it. A low whisper filled the car. Michael turned. The woman in red was standing now, and she wasn't alone. More passengers had appeared. Men, women, children, all pale, lifeless far, but smiling. Their voices overlapped in a whisper. "One more stop, and you'll be with us." Michael bolted toward the door. He tried prying it open. Locked. He pounded on the emergency button. Nothing. And then a cold hand grabbed his wrist. Michael turned in terror. The conductor had appeared, an old man in a rotting uniform, his eyes black pits of emptiness. "You shouldn't have boarded," he said. Michael struggled. "No, I'm not supposed to be here." The conductor tilted his head. "Yes, you are. You saw her. That means you belong to us now." Michael's vision blurred. The whispers grew louder. The last thing he saw was his own reflection in the window. But it wasn't him anymore. It was one of them. The doors slid open, and the train moved on, into nowhere. My name is Liam, and this happened when I was 23. My friends and I were avid hikers, always looking for new trails to explore. One weekend, we decided to visit Black Hollow Forest, a dense woodland shrouded in local legends. The stories warned of strange disappearances and whispered voices that lured people off the trails. "It's just an old folk tale," my friend Mark said as we packed our gear. I wanted to believe him, but something about the forest felt wrong. Even before we stepped inside, the trail was overgrown, the trees towering above us and blocking out most of the sunlight. As we walked, the air grew colder, and the usual sounds of nature, birds, insects, the rustling of leaves, were absent. "It's too quiet," Sarah said, glancing around nervously. "It's just the season," Mark replied. But even he seemed uneasy. About an hour into the hike, we came across something strange. A circle of stones in the middle of the trail. They were arranged in a perfect spiral, with no sign of who might have placed them there. "Maybe it's a marker," Sarah suggested, but her voice was uncertain. When Mark stepped into the circle, the air grew colder, and we all heard it, a faint whisper, like the wind carrying words we couldn't understand. As we continued deeper into the forest, I noticed something strange. My watch had stopped. When I asked the others for the time, they realized their phones and watches weren't working either. "It's just bad reception," Mark said, but his voice wavered. We decided to head back, but the trail behind us was gone, replaced by dense trees and undergrowth. "It's like the forest moved," Sarah whispered. As the sun began to set, we saw them, dark figures, moving between the trees. At first, they were just shadows, but as they drew closer, we could make out their hollow eyes and twisted forms. "Did you see that?" I asked, but the others were already backing away. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. "They're watching us," Sarah said, her voice trembling. We stumbled into a small clearing and found an old, abandoned cabin. The windows were shattered, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. "It's better than staying out here," Mark said, though none of us wanted to go inside. The air inside the cabin was damp and cold, and the walls were covered in strange carved symbols. In the corner, we found a tattered journal, its pages filled with frantic handwriting. "They come at night," one entry read. "The whispers never stop. Don't follow the lights." That night, as we huddled together in the cabin, we saw them. Small, flickering lights dancing among the trees. "They're just fireflies," Mark said, though his voice was strained. But as the lights drew closer, We realized they weren't natural. They moved with purpose, circling the cabin and casting eerie shadows through the broken windows. The whispers returned louder than before, and we could hear faint footsteps outside. At some point during the night, Mark disappeared. We woke up to find his sleeping bag empty, the cabin door wide open. "Mark!" Sarah called, but the only response was the faint sound of laughter echoing through the forest. We found his footprints leading into the woods, but they stopped abruptly, as if he had vanished into thin air. Desperate to escape, Sarah and I followed what we thought was the trail back to the road. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees twisting unnaturally. We saw the lights again, brighter now, and the shadows grew closer, their hollow eyes fixed on us. "They're coming," Sarah whispered, clutching my arm. I grabbed her hand, and we ran as fast as we could, the whispers growing deafening. Just as we thought we were trapped, we broke through the trees and stumbled onto the road. We never found Mark, and the police search yielded nothing. A few weeks later, I found a news article about Black Hollow Forest. It mentioned dozens of disappearances over the years, all unexplained. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers and see the lights dancing in the darkness. I'll never set foot in those woods again. If you ever hear stories about a forest that feels too quiet, trust the warnings. Some places are meant to be left undisturbed, and some paths lead only to the unknown.